Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back if you were joining us all day, and welcome if you're just coming on now for our question and answer this afternoon. I'd like to begin by we have two panelists. I'd like to begin by introducing you to Dr. Richard Cash. He is an award-winning educator and author who has worked in the field of education for over 30 years. His range of experience includes teaching, curriculum coordination, and program administration. Currently, he is an internationally recognized educational coach and consultant. He is also the author of several books. One that the teachers are very familiar with across our state is Advancing Differentiation for Thinking and Learning for the 21st Century. So welcome, Richard Cash.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm going to switch over here to my screen. There we go. I just want to share with you a little bit about most of the focus that I've been working on in the last several years. I had started studying it prior to the pandemic and then now have been doing a lot of work on it post-pandemic. But that's really about self-regulation and how students need to become more self-directed in their learning, especially for gifted kids. All kids should be independent. Gifted kids really should be moving towards what is called self-directedness. And that's that they want to learn something because they want to learn it, not because the school tells them they should learn it. Self-regulation basically is a tri-dimensional concept of who we are, and each of these sides is equal and is codependent. So I'm just going to go through this very, very briefly because we've got such a short amount of time. The reason I share this is because you've probably heard of the term asynchrony in gifted education. And here is where I finally, after 30 years of working in the field of gifted ed, kind of had this big aha moment with this. Self-regulated learning requires three co-equal, codependent dimensions of ourselves. One of the dimensions is our affect, how we feel. How we feel about a situation determines the focus of our attention. Many people will think that feelings are emotion. Well, I want to clarify that. Emotion is actually a chemical reaction that happens in your brain. When we respond to that chemical reaction, the emotion, we are reading out our feelings. So I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel joyful, I feel frightened now during the Halloween season when I get goosebumps, that's all affect, how I feel. So again, how I feel about a situation determines the focus of my attention. So if I'm not feeling challenged, I'm going to disengage. Oftentimes, then, that's why bright kids will say, I'm bored. They're bored because the stimuli is not enough for them to engage in it, to motivate, to be engaged with it. So they have this feeling of what is called boredom. The next dimension is behavioral, and those are our actions, what we do, how we work with others, how we communicate with others, how we get along, how we learn how to walk down the hallway, how we sit in our desk. All of that stuff is behavioral. In my experience as a teacher, oftentimes my gifted students were belligerent because they didn't want to do it the way I wanted them to do it. And they oftentimes had better ways of doing it than I asked them to do it. So that can be kind of offsetting for them. The third dimension is the cognitive dimension, and cognitive dimension are our thinking processes. There are three levels to that. First, what is called metacognition. Everybody does that. That's the thinking of thinking about our own thinking, but it's really that which is belief systems. What do you believe about yourself? What do you tell yourself about yourself? What do others tell you about yourself? And what does society tell you about yourself? Now, you might be thinking, well, gifted kids, they the parent might be saying they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but the community that they're in school is not allowing them to get what they need academically. So that can be a disconnect for them. To have the next level of cognition, which I entitled infracognition, which are the levels of thinking, is really what is self-efficacy. If you don't have a good self-esteem, you don't rise up to self-efficacy, because self-efficacy is knowing you've got the tools to do what it is that you need to do. Well, if your self-belief is getting in the way, you're not going to rise to self-efficacy, which is what we as educators want for our students. The highest level, and here's where gifted comes in, is what is called metaphysical cognition. And metaphysical cognition is the thoughts beyond the self. That is that esoteric, theoretical, philosophical thinking that many highly gifted kids start off early. And most of us get there around 28, 30 years old. But gifted kids, and I used to teach first grade gifted, I had 6-year-olds coming up to me with very esoteric questions such as what happens when we die, not asking about decomposition and so forth, but really wanting to know what's beyond this plane. So here's where asynchrony comes in. So that little child, that little guy, Jeffrey was his name, is his name. He was thinking metaphysically, but affectively, he's still 6. So behaviorally, he's still 6, but he's thinking at such high level, there's a disconnect. So one of the things that I'm always teaching teachers and parents and gifted kids is to keep the ABCs, affect, behavior, cognition, in mind, because that is what is going to help our kids become more balanced. How are you feeling? What are you doing that's working or not working? What do you think you might want to do next time? So I tried to stay under 5 minutes there. So all of my books are available through freespirit.com, and you can use that code there, cash30, to get 30% off. So there you go, Denise.
Oh
I'm
my
trying to keep
gosh, that was
under 5 minutes.
fantastic. I can't wait for you to field some of the questions. This is going to be
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay, so our next panelist is Dr. Susan Rakow. Dr. Rakow is a clinical mental health counselor with specialized expertise in counseling gifted children, adolescents, and their families. She works as a licensed professional counselor at Family Achievement Clinic with Dr. Sylvia Rim, and she's also the author of a book called Educating Gifted Students in the Middle School, a Practical Guide. Boy, could we all use that for middle school kiddos. So welcome, Dr. Susan Rakow.
Thank you. I have no idea how to show you my slides. I seem to have, I don't see a thing that's, oh wait, I do. Okay, but I'll get to that in a second. I'd like to address the question that came through on the webinar chat, if that's okay. Because recently, I have been working with a lot of the 17 to 25-year-olds in my counseling practice. And the issue about gifted kids in college is a pretty significant one. And there's a number of aspects to that. One is they have certain expectations about what college is going to be like, and they're always off. Whatever you think it's going to be, it's not. So that's the first thing. And they're used to being right and used to being prepared for whatever is coming, gifted kids. And so that's dysregulating for them. The second thing is either it's more of the same like high school, or it's the first time they meet a challenge, which is very dysregulating. So all of these things come back and say, wait a second, what about the fact that I'm gifted and I was the smartest kid in my class and I had who knows, I don't even know what the SAT scores are supposed to be, but I had amazing SAT scores. And now here I am either at someplace like Cleveland State or Yale. I mean, who knows where the kids end up, and whatever it is they expected. So they really need to have a reckoning about who am I at all the levels that the previous speaker was talking about. And, who am I? What do I value? How do I get enough sleep? How do I stay connected to a spiritual life, which means connecting to things that are bigger than yourself? And how do I develop the executive function skills that I need when I no longer have a completely structured day the way I did in high school. My parents aren't telling me what to do. My teachers aren't telling me what to do. You get a syllabus. Maybe you've never had a syllabus before. So I think that that is a really important thing about college. And so if I can, I'm going to see if I can share this screen. I saw something before that said share screen. Let's see. It was there and now it has disappeared. Okay. So the things I wanted to talk about were things that I see in my counseling practice. And the words overscheduled and overwhelmed are really some of the main ones that I hear. And then when I listen to parents and how many activities kids are doing, I don't know when they sleep. So there are 5 foundational components to overall well-being, and they are getting enough sleep, which somewhere between 6 and 9 hours, getting enough nutrition, which in Cleveland anyway means you better be taking some vitamin D, because look at outside, it's just dreary. But I'm a fan of a multiple vitamin, even though medicine says it's unnecessary. I think for teenagers especially, it fills in the gaps. So healthy eating and some supplements per the health of the child. The third one is exercise, a minimum of 20 minutes a day outside. Gifted kids often don't want to do that. They need to do it anyway. So for parents, it's like, take the dog for a walk, come with me for a walk, and taking especially your tween and your teenager for a walk when you're not going face to face, that's when you're going to get the good stuff, because they do not want to sit, unless it's in a therapy office, face to face and tell you what's going on. If you want to have the sex talk, it's the best time when they're not looking at you or when they're in the back seat of the car. Those things work also. But when your kid says to you, they're overwhelmed or overscheduled or they're anxious, here's the best phrase I encourage parents to use. Oh, that must be really hard for you. Tell me more about it. Our tendency is to jump in and fix. Well, if you if you quit soccer, you'd have more time and you'd feel better. Well, they don't want to quit soccer. They love soccer, and it's healthy for them to do soccer. So, but if you say, gee, that sounds hard for you, tell me more about it, and then listen, just absolutely listen to what they have to say. When kids' anxiety seems to be more than they can handle, we may sometimes think, well, does my kid have ADHD? Because ADHD and anxiety can overlap, and that's when an assessment can help. ADHD is over-identified in boys and under-identified in girls, over-identified in African American kids, under-identified in Southeast Asian and Indian kids. And so we need to be aware. And you might have a high school kid or even a college kid who comes and says, you know what, I cannot concentrate on this stuff. And it's possible that they need assessment to find out what it is that's going on with them, and that can be helpful. I'll leave the executive functioning and self-regulation to Richard. His expertise is there. But I also want to make sure that we don't avoid talking about the impact of COVID and the COVID responses at home and at school. Even though COVID as a virus is still around and we can get vaccinated if we want to, or we have masks if we want to, I am seeing in the office of children of every single age and way into young adulthood, social and emotional impacts of the lockdown. And kids don't have the social skills that you would expect for a particular age. Kids don't necessarily have the emotional maturity or the executive function skills that you might expect. And they may also not have the academic background, no matter how gifted they are. Some things You don't get algebra from the air for most kids. So you have to figure that out. What is actually going on and what's the COVID impact on a particular child? And lastly, I just wanted to say, when Denise posted in the chat that starting with the school counselor is a really good idea if you have a kid who is, struggling in some way, I would also suggest that you can look for a counselor outside of the school. And when you do, it's my experience that there are 3 things to look for in an outside counselor for gifted kids, in addition to having had some experience with gifted kids. Look for somebody who can do cognitive behavioral therapy, because for a gifted kid, the cognitive piece is very, very important. Look for somebody who understands existential therapy, because gifted kids and young adults are asking the big questions. And finally, also building on the previous presenter, there's a strategy called emotional freedom techniques, or EFT, which works through the body to get rid of some trauma, anxiety, depression, and so on. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I made the transition about 10 or 12 years ago from teacher and professor to counselor and therapist. And I've learned so much. And I'm happy to share anything that might be useful for people.
Okay, let's open it up then to our participants. They can pose their questions now in the chat. I think the 2 of you were checking the chat then.
Great. And Susan, so great to hear you from a therapy side from the academic side. We're saying the exact same things to parents all the time. Our kids are overscheduled. The kids didn't overschedule themselves. Somebody had to do that for them. And so I just did a parent workshop in Seattle, or no, I'm sorry, up in New York, and kind of made that message to parents very clear, these are parents of gifted kids, that you're in control of that, not your child. And I mainly deal with, the early childhood all the way in through middle school, not necessarily middle school through high school, but I still do that work. But I say it all the time. The adult has to be the adult in this situation. And so I thank you so much for saying that from a therapeutic side, because that's exactly what I've been saying too.
Even for high school parents, at some point, if your kid is not sleeping because they have too many things that they're doing and they're staying up too late with, 4 AP classes, that's when you set you're still the parent in charge. And then I have one parent of a high school sophomore who said, I don't care what else you have to do. You will be in bed at 9:30, because this kid has hysterical meltdowns when they don't get enough sleep. And so, the kid was not happy, but they are not melting down anymore.
And again, I get pushback from parents on this because, well, but they like it. I said, I know kids like French fries too. You can't give them a steady diet of French fries. You have to be the adult in the situation. Now, there's a difference between flow and overscheduling. Many gifted kids will get into flow, and every kid gets into flow, Minecraft or any of those technology things, but they can hone in, but they're not over stressing themselves. They're enjoying the work. They're liking the challenge. And the parent has to step in and say, you got to stop. I mean, the neural research, and you know this, Susan, the neural research says that our brain basically stops after 90 minutes. It's so tired that it can't learn anymore. It's going to just shut off, and it's going to be like a hamster on a wheel and just spin and spin and spin.
This may be outdated, but it's the statistic I cite. The average adult attention span is about 20 minutes, not counting a flow state for artists and musicians and so on. And so, for a 14-year-old, your attention span's probably about 15 minutes. So I tell parents, you have to set or kids, You set your watch or your timer or something for 15 minutes. You get up, you get a drink of water. You just don't touch your technology. You cannot do that for about 3 or 4 minutes. And then you go back and do another 15 to 20 minutes. And I suggest people do something physical. I suggest jumping jacks. I suggest there's a qigong exercise where you're rocking back and forth on the balls of your feet and swinging your arms, and you get the stress out of your body, and you wake up your brain, and you sit back down, and it's like, oh, okay, this is going to work. So,
Where this is so funny. I haven't seen you in years, and
I
that we're
know.
saying the exact same thing out there because this is what the science is telling
Right.
us, and
Yep.
we have to believe the science. Now, one of the questions are, what do you do? What's advice for a family that has one gifted kid and others that are not? Well, first and foremost, we have to understand gifted kids are first and foremost kids. Period. Full stop. Drop the mic. Walk away. Their gift is something that needs to be honed, something that may represent itself in kind of different ways than you may recognize with your quote unquote non gifted kids. But the likelihood in the research that I've read that if there's one gifted kid, the nuts don't fall far from the tree. So there are going to be more gifted kids in that family. It's just maybe they're just not recognized.
I would add to that that there are some behaviors that we can change. So if we have an academically gifted kid and an academically typical kid who's an athlete or an artist or a musician, don't hang up the report card on the refrigerator. There are some things that you can consistently talk about each person's strength, and everyone has value, and being proud of your children for who they are. Oftentimes, I'll see in a family that the gifted kid has a sharp edge and the other kid is just really kind. And to make sure that we're saying, yeah, you could soften that a little bit, and to the kind sibling or the creative sibling or whatever it is, to really make sure that we are seeing our kids for what their abilities and talents. And sometimes your talent is you roll with the punches. Life is easier for typical kids. And so, it's like, wow, I really like how you just kind of relaxed and watched a movie with the family. That was great. I loved being with you. And so, really making sure that we are not using academics as the primary measure of value in the family. And it's not, I'll tell you, in our family, I thought I was doing a really good job. And then, my daughter came home with her report card in around middle school and handed it to me. And before I could say anything, she said, "Let me tell you about the B plus." And everything else was an A, but she didn't see that. She just wanted to tell me about the B plus. So I thought I was doing a good job, but clearly I was not.
You
So,
know, Susan, that brings up something, another piece that I've been doing quite a bit of study on is the imposter phenomenon. They're really trying to get away from the word syndrome. The imposter phenomenon, what I read was that over 80%, like almost 90% of gifted kids have the imposter phenomenon at some point in their life, and you just represented that with your daughter. She and girls will tend to do this more than boys will, where girls will tend to want to blame themselves for lack of perfections, where boys will blame others. Oh, well, the reason I got that B plus is because the teacher didn't tell me everything I needed to know, where your daughter was taking it on herself. But that imposter phenomenon, one of the ways that is developed is when kids are pitted against each other within a family, where a parent may say, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your sister? And that propels that imposter phenomenon, which it's not always bad. because that kind of keeps you in check and keeps that balance of humbleness and all that stuff. However, it can get in the way, especially for girls in fields such as math and science, where if it's a female doctor meeting with a male doctor, that can set up a hierarchy where the male will be perceived as higher. And we're seeing that right now with our election. Right now, the woman is not perceived as being as high as the male, and that's that social piece of imposterism.
Yeah. Yep. And I see it with women clients as well. Grown women who are, unstable in some
Yeah.
way. Yeah. Are there other questions in the chat that I'm not sure of, that I'm not seeing?
I don't see any. Oh wait, how would you address a teen who has been chronically under challenged and seen by their school to the point that they are unseen by their school to the point that they no longer feel safe at school and are disengaged? Hopefully I'm not going to type an answer because that is coming through a different Q&A system. Um, Susan, I'm gonna volley that over to you. It's what do you do? How do you address a teen who's being chronically under challenged and unseen by their school to the point that they no longer feel safe at school and are disengaged?
So one of the things that I do is I sometimes volunteer to go to the school with the parents and the teen. And sometimes looking at what are the alternative educational options, both online and in person in that person's community. And also to find out, to really explore what under-challenged and unseen means to that teenager. What does unseen? Are there gender issues? Are there orientation issues? Are they, is it a really small, very conforming mean girl environment? Or is it a macho sports environment and this kid is not? It depends. But I think that helping the child become, or the young person, a teenager, find out who they are, help them to believe that they matter, and that they are important and that they are valuable. And also, you'll be out of school soon, you know? And maybe you're I know this is maybe gonna rub some parents of gifted kids the wrong way. Get the hell out of school. Take the GED and go do something else. Go to college. Get a trade. See the world. I mean, I don't know. School is not. I learned this from a gifted nephew who said, "I hate this. I just don't learn this way." And he went to a vocational he's 23. He owns a house and he does whatever he darn well pleases. He learns what he likes. He reads what he likes. He's married at 20. He made himself a beautiful life. But he's a different kind of learner. And he just did not function that way. But I do know that for parents of gifted kids, school seems to be the yardstick by which everything is measured. And that might not be the case. So I would address the teen by helping them do a real inventory of who they are, what matters to them, do they have any classes or teachers in the school who get them, and how can we increase their connection to those people?
I am so glad you cited the vocational world. At the last NAGC conference, I did a workshop with my sister, who is a high school family consumer science teacher, old home ec, And we talked about broadening the definition of gifted and talented to include the CTE world, the career and technical education world. Your nephew, having being 23, probably is pulling down $100,000 if he's in the trades. If he's owning a home already at 23, kids graduating from college aren't making that. And I come at that question from the school side. Maybe have the teen, once they've had the conversation with the parents about what are they really excited about, what really gets their engine going, either talk to the counselor within the school or talk to a trusted teacher or administrator in the school and share what your talent is, share what you're excited about, share what gets you going, and then have that adult help you work with other teachers to then be able to include that within what they're doing. The other thing is look into your school district. Your school district maybe has an open school that is, it's all student centered. It's not teacher centered. It's all about the kid and how can the kid prove proficiencies to standards, the benchmarks that we have to prove for a kid to succeed. But again, I love your idea, Susan, of go take the GED. You probably could pass it at 7th grade.
Right.
Get the hell out of there. Go off and go to a trade. There is not a community college or a trade school that is going to refuse your money. So go for it. Go someplace else.
I just want to add one other piece to that, which I totally agree with you, Richard, but I think sometimes kids and parents will listen to this message from someone who is not in the school. So things that I can say as a therapist, both to parents and to the kid, as an outside person from the school, sometimes carries a little more weight. And maybe it shouldn't, but it does. And, I think sometimes bringing in an outside voice can really, and it can also move parents away from thinking that Harvard is the only place for gifted kids. That there are a lot of options for, and if your kid is a computer kid, they probably don't need to go to school for that at all. But anyway, it is a very individual question, and it's very important to get somebody who gets your kid and gets the kid in order to help guide them in a more positive direction.
Oh, this next question. This is just bait for me. One of the things that I did when I was the director of gifted programs in Bloomington, Minnesota, was I started a school for highly profoundly gifted kids. So it was a school within a school. They had to have 140 IQ and greater. I had already had my doctorate by that point in gifted education, but I never learned more about gifted kids than seeing them highly profoundly gifted kids together and their interactions from grade 2 through grade 10. Highly profoundly gifted kids can tend to be outliers, both socially, emotionally, and definitely academically. And they can just be as normal can be. But the outliers tend to be higher. The poppy tends to be much higher. Their anxieties may tend to be more extreme. Their social and emotional needs may be more extreme. I have found that, highly profoundly gifted kids maybe only have one, maybe two friends, and it's almost like they speak Klingon to each other because they are the only ones that understand their own languages. That they're probably, as an academic, they're not easy to teach because they assume so much information so rapidly. But it's trying to give them the more, why are we learning this kind of stuff? So There is a very distinct difference, and you have to be careful with that term gifted because we overuse it in education when it's really just high achievers, or those kids who are really passionate about something and they work hard at it. That's not really a truly gifted kid, especially profoundly gifted kids. Those, like I said, they can be real extreme outliers. And Susan, I'm sure you have more on the psychological end than I do.
I think the key, I think that makes perfect sense in a school setting. I think the other piece of it is to remember that if we looked at the normal curve, two-thirds of the population fits between an IQ of 85 and 115. And then we move it out another standard error, standard deviation out to like 130 and then 70. And then we've got almost everybody. And if we go further down the lower side, we understand as educators, as social service people, and as parents that lower functioning child is experiencing the world in a significantly different way than their typical peers. Not worse, just different. And the child who has the next level up, the 130 or 145 and above IQ, they are not experiencing the world the way their typical peers are. They are more easily frustrated. They don't get typically why everyone doesn't see what they see and see as deeply and as quickly as they do. And so high achieving kids just do the work. Profoundly gifted kids say, I learned this when I was 3. Why are you giving me this garbage? Or they say, yep, it took me 15 minutes. I finished the entire book. Now what? So a lot of things are different in how they experience the world, and schools, such as part of their world, they also don't take, they're not too into hierarchy. So they generally think their teachers are dumber than them. And so that level of respect, sometimes when I was teaching the middle school gifted kids, I just wanted to wear a sign that just said, because I'm old. And it had nothing to do with who was smarter. It's just that I'm a lot older than you, and you're just going to have to trust me on this, that this is the way the world works, whether you like it or not. And so that is, again, the really significant role of both parents and therapists and counselors, school counselors and teachers, who understand that there is high achieving and ordinary gifted, and then there's the profoundly gifted who live on another planet. I mean, I remember that I had a kid in my class, never took notes. And part of what I wanted them to learn was how to take notes. So I said to Adam, you don't take notes in my class. This is one-on-one. And he said, right. And I said, well, how come? He said, well, when I need to, I'll write something down. And I said, all right, here's the deal. If you get anything less than a 90 on our tests, you need to take notes. And he said, okay. Can you guess that he never had to take notes because he was such a strong auditory and visual learner? It just came easily to him. He went to Yale. But he didn't go to Yale for what you think. He went to Yale for drama.
Good for him. That's my first degree is in theater.
I don't know what he did after that. That was the last I heard. But I do think that profoundly gifted kids are significantly different. And if you keep that normal curve in mind, it'll help you to understand why that is. They don't fit in the world. The world was made for average people. Average people, period. Not just kids.
Right.
I mean, a lot of us are weird also, so.
One of the things that I always try to tell teachers and parents that we learn our social skills from the people that we're around, right? When we go to kindergarten, we learn social skills, how to get in line, how to work at a group, and so forth. Well, remember, a highly profoundly gifted kid is probably thinking at a 7th or 8th grade level in kindergarten, is already seeing other kids and saying they can't, they don't, why don't they do it? Why don't they already know all of the chemical elements in the chemical, or in, the elements chart? Why don't they know that stuff? And they get very frustrated with their peers. So then they get either socially isolated because they're weird, or they socially isolate themselves because everybody else is weird. So that's where we start to see that social segregation happening, especially in school, because they are weird. They're like you said, they're on a different planet. And one of the things that I have recognized is that they will have fewer friends. So not having a bunch of friends is not a big deal, but they're going to have a very passionate relationship with that other